Hello everyone and welcome to YMB Movie Talk from your movie blogger. My name is Simon Mansell. I'm so happy that you've decided to join me today for the 14th episode of my podcast, YMB Movie Talk. You'll notice, if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll notice I'm lit well. I'm so happy. This does not mean that I've got the desk thing sorted. I'm still in the room, as you can see. I'm on my mattress, but I was able to kind of find my studio lights for my photography lights. I was able to find them and use them because I was just sick of having crap lighting on my video. If you watched the last podcast on YouTube, if you watched it live, you'll have known that it looked awful. Like, it looks so bad. I feel like this looks a lot better. I'm still kind of learning the whole thing with the live streaming and stuff on YouTube as far as like a visual standpoint goes, and I'll get better in the future. But I think for now, this is definitely a step up. I actually look normal now. I don't look like some meshed up kind of collage of pixels. So that makes a nice change. That's good. But yeah, guys, we're back doing the Marvel Cinematic Universe today. This podcast usually consists of different topics that I talk about going on in the world of film. But for the past 3 episodes, I've mainly been focusing on talking about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, reviewing all the films that are in this series, giving my opinions on them, the good parts, the bad parts, giving an even kind of review of them, and then giving them a score at the end and talking about the films overall. So this will be the same kind of format today, guys. If you do like what I'm doing with the podcast and that, make sure you subscribe, hit the notifications bell on YouTube so you never miss a video in the future. Also, if you prefer listening to the audio versions of this podcast, you can find it on SoundCloud and Spotify. The links for those will be in the description down below. So yeah, if you're listening on there on Spotify and SoundCloud, make sure you follow my accounts on there. And make sure you follow the podcasts as well so you keep up to date with anything going on with my podcast on there. So with that out the way, guys, we're going to jump straight into talking about Marvel Phase 3 today. And the first film in Marvel's Phase 3 is Captain America Civil War. Now, if you've watched my review for the first Captain America film and the second one in my last 2 podcast episodes, you'll know that these are 2 of my favourite films from each of the different phases. So we had Phase 1, Captain America the First Avenger. I loved it. I thought it was a fantastic film, even though for a lot of people, Captain America the First Avenger, they saw as boring. I didn't see it as boring, personally. I thought it was a good character study. I thought the characters overall, that was one of the strongest points. The first 2 acts of Captain America the First Avenger, for me, are some of the best Marvel content we've ever had. Captain America the Winter Soldier is brilliant from start to finish. For me, it is the best film in the MCU, even now. I'd still say that. I still think it's the best film even now. So Captain America Civil War has a lot to live up to. Does it live up to the past 2 films? Kind of. And what I mean by kind of is, do I think Captain America Civil War is better than the first 2 films? For me, no. I don't think it is. Is it really good? Yes. But the past 2 films for me are some of the best films in the series. So it's kind of hard to... It's hard for a series to keep that quality throughout. I think this is very close to the second one, to the first one, sorry, as far as quality. I don't think there's much difference. But I do think the first one was a tighter story. It focused more on Captain America. This feels more like Avengers 2.5. And I know people were saying it like kind of like nicknaming it that for a long time. But I think that point is very, very prevalent when talking about Captain America Civil War, because is it really a Captain America film? Or is it a film about the breakdown of the Avengers? I would say, personally, it's more the second, even though the main focus of the film is Captain America. I would definitely say that. I think the main focus of the film is still Captain America, his relationship with Bucky. But there's so much other moving parts in the story. I don't think really it is a Captain America film necessarily. Even though he's the main character, him and Iron Man are the main characters, It feels more like Iron Man 4 and Avengers 2.5. So that in itself knocks it down a little bit for me, because I like kind of solo contained stories in a way. I like the fact that the past two Captain America films were Captain America films. That the main focus of those films was the character of Captain America. It wasn't anything else. It was Captain America, and that was it, right? With this film, we're given so much more time towards setting up Black Panther, introducing Spider-Man, focusing on Tony Stark. You know, the relationship between kind of Wanda and Vision is built up a little bit more in this. But I think that drags away from the main story of Captain America that's been set up in the past two films. So the past two films focused on the character of Steve Rogers in his own time and then in our time, and how he adjusts to like the two different settings, even though the character stays consistent. And the character still stays consistent in this film. He's definitely still the same character. I just think he lacks the development needed for it to be a solo Captain America film. Do I still think it's really good? Yes. I think it's really good if you don't look at it as a Captain America film. If you look at it as like Avengers 2.5, like the middle ground between Avengers Age of Ultron and Avengers Infinity War, then yes, this works brilliantly. If this was called like Avengers Civil War, it would have had more kind of a prevalent context there. But because it's called Captain America, I think you have to judge it on that, because it doesn't really feel like a Captain America film. Away from that, if we're talking about just the individual quality of the film, this film is really good. This film is really good. I really like it because the story for me is so well developed over the course of the film. Like, people say that Daniel Bruhl's character, Zemo, isn't a good villain. And I think what people mean by that is because he's not very physically intimidating. He doesn't pose like a physical threat to the Avengers. But I think instead they really work it well that his threat towards the Avengers is more kind of mentally, psychologically, getting in their heads, messing with them as a team to kind of break down from the inside. And it works really well in the context of the film, because the main focus of the film is still the relationship between Steve Rogers and Tony Stark. That's been the strongest kind of flow through throughout the entire series. In all of the MCU, has been the relationship between Steve Rogers and Tony Stark, and I think it's really, really well developed here through the relationship between like Steve and Howard back in the first film. And then if you get to this film and you see it kind of all comes full circle, because it was Steve's friend Bucky who ended up murdering Tony's parents. And obviously Steve knew Tony's parents. So it kind of comes full circle like that. And I like that kind of symmetrical storytelling. I enjoy that kind of throwing back and linking different storylines with each other. And I like that in the film. I think it's really fun. And it makes the film more engaging. You engage more into the characters. You feel more for the characters than probably you would have done otherwise. I think the introduction of Spider-Man, even though it feels extremely unnecessary and it feels extremely tacked on, like, you can tell this was a decision made very late in the game. I think that you can tell this decision was made very late in the game. Mainly due to the fact that I don't think the Spider-Man Sony Marvel deal was done until like 2015, like mid 2015. This film came out in like May 2016. So they was already in production of this film by the time that, they'd already had the script written and everything, and then Spider-Man gets introduced, and it does feel like he's kind of shoved in there a little bit. Same as Black Panther in a way, he kind of feels a little bit shoved in there, even though his story kind of molds better with the Avengers than Spider-Man does, because it was, again, they think that it was Bucky who killed Black Panther's dad, even though it wasn't, but that he kind of feels like it is. So that's where Steve would come into play then, because he wants to protect his friend. So that kind of molds well together the Black Panther introduction. And I do think this is the best Black Panther we get. Personally, I think this version of Black Panther that we got in Civil War was the best version of the character that we got. I think Chadwick Boseman plays him so well. I mean, before this, he was known for films like Get On Up and 42. Those are the films that really cemented him as like a really good actor and made him like quite a sought after name, really. And I think he was brilliant in this film. Obviously, it's sad looking back because of what's happened with Chadwick Boseman and the struggles that he was having physically during production of all of the films he was featuring during the MCU. But I do think this was the best performance he gave. I think this is the best character arc for him. I think really they did a better character arc in this film than they did for his actual film. Personally, I think in his we'll get to the Black Panther film later, but just talking about his introduction in Civil War, I think it works really well. So I think all the characters are worked well into the story, even though I think it's a little bit too much. There's too much going on, too many characters that probably don't need to be there. That's very true. However, it still works well and it's still fun, and the characters, they all have really good interactions together. They all mold really well together in the film. It never feels like the actors are kind of just there to pick up a paycheck. You can see they're passionate about these characters at this point. You can see that they all want to be there. And I think Captain America Civil War is probably, would it crack my top 10 of MCU films? Maybe not. Maybe it'd just be on the outside a little bit, even though there's a lot that I love in this film. I just think the story's a little bit too convoluted for its own good. And I think the lack of focus on Captain America is a bit of a problem. And I think I mentioned it in the previous video, and I'm going to mention it again. The visual style, the flat grey colour grading is just, it is what it is at this point. It's the same going forward. So it's a problem, and it's a problem in every single MCU film. So I'm only going to mention it in this little section on Civil War. It's a problem in every single MCU film, and that's one of the things that holds these films back from being kind of visually like visual masterpieces. I think that's a bit of a problem. But apart from that, I love Civil War. I love the film. It's got great action, probably the best action in the MCU. It's got a compelling story. I think the villain works well. I think the conflict between Steve Rogers and Tony Stark is developed well throughout the film. I just think the fact that it's a little bit too, the focus is took away from the main character a little bit, makes the film feel a bit more messy than it probably could have been. I think if you take a few characters out of this film, focus on Tony and Steve a bit more, I think this film would have been a lot better than it was. But I do still like it, and it's still one of my favourite go-to MCU films. I still really enjoy it, and it's a really good film from start to finish. So with Captain America Civil War out the way, let's get on to the next film of Marvel Phase 3, and that is talking about Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange feels more like a Phase 1 film in many ways, because it's an origin story of the character, because it's setting up all these little things that we're going to kind of see later on with the character in other films. It feels more like a Phase 1 film. So is that a bad thing? No, because I liked the Phase 1 films. Even Thor with its Dutch angles and terrible love story, it's still fun. So it's not a negative to say that. I'm not going to say it's a negative that it feels like a Phase 1 film. But I would be lying if I didn't say that a lot of the film Doctor Strange feels very slow. Very slow. And I don't think the character of Stephen Strange is compelling enough, is interesting enough, and I don't think he has enough emotional resonance within his own story to make the film more than it is. And that's a problem, because this film, in a way, is very much kind of copying the Iron Man formula. We have someone who's, a cocky kind of person, very arrogant, very flamboyant, likes to show off all the amazing things they've got in their lives, go through something traumatic, get a very fatal injury, narrowly survive. They have to find a way to kind of live with this new injury, and then they find the goodness within them and they change their life around and all that. So the story, the characters are very much played out in a very similar way. And it does feel like it takes a bit too much from Iron Man. It feels too familiar. I don't think the film does enough new. The best parts of Doctor Strange is the visual style of the film. And when I say the visual style, I don't mean the colour. That's still a problem. But as far as the creativity in the scenes where Stephen Strange goes to Kamar-Taj to meet the Ancient One, and she sends him into this weird dimension where there's all these like weird visuals, and that's amazing. That's some of the best visual storytelling we've seen in an MCU film, and it builds on kind of what we saw at the end of Ant-Man when he goes into the quantum realm. It kind of develops on that visually, and it kind of this film is directed by Scott Derrickson, who is mostly known for horror, and you can see the kind of horror influence in some of the imagery in this film. It is very kind of supernatural, very surreal, very bizarre imagery. And I think it works because it makes the film feel very unique in its visual presentation. So that's a very strong point for Doctor Strange. The same goes for the action sequences. I think they're very smartly done. I think they feel unique. They feel different than anything we've got in the MCU so far. It's not just two people doing karate, you know what I mean? It feels more creative than that. With the type of character that Doctor Strange is, you get to see all these different weapons introduced. You get to see like their portal ring weapon that they do, how creative they get with that, as far as like chopping off limbs and sending people to different parts of the world and then cutting them off. And I like that. I like the action in this film. The action, I don't talk about action much in my reviews because action kind of feels the same in every film, really. It's very copy and paste across all of mainstream films. But I like Doctor Strange because it feels creative and it feels different and it feels like something we've not really seen before. So the uniqueness of Doctor Strange is one of the strongest aspects for me. Throughout the entire film, it feels unique in its visual presentation, and it feels creative. It's just the story sometimes feels a bit too familiar. Now, Benedict Cumberbatch is fantastic in the film. I like Benedict Cumberbatch as Doctor Strange. I remember when he was cast, he felt very much like the safe choice for this role. And I still feel that now. I don't think he was the most ambitious casting necessarily. I don't think he was bad casting. I just think, I remember when Joaquin Phoenix was being rumoured and Johnny Depp was being rumoured, and I think they could have really emphasised a different personality for Doctor Strange. He kind of just feels like a very kind of cheap Tony Stark rip-off kind of character. And I think Benedict Cumberbatch definitely embraces that a little bit. Like he feels like he's trying to be a bit of a Robert Downey Jr. type of performance. Very, trying to be funny, trying to be quippy, trying to embrace this more comedic, sarcastic side. And it doesn't work. It makes him feel like he's a bit of a dick. Like, for a lot of this film, the character of Doctor Strange is very unlikable. Whether that's done on purpose or not, I think he's very unlikable, and not in the way that a Tony Stark at the start of Iron Man is unlikable, because you still like the character despite, how much of a dick he's being. Like, he's very charming, he's very witty, he's very funny. Like, you kind of embrace this character more. Whereas Doctor Strange, the character of Stephen Strange, you don't really do that for. He feels like he's just a bit of a dick. And I think that's mainly because of how Cumberbatch plays him. He feels like he's trying to be something he's not very comfortable doing, and that kind of shines through for me. Same thing with the villain. I think the villain's very much wasted, in my opinion. Mads Mikkelsen's one of my favourite actors out there. He's fantastic in almost everything he's in. And he can be a good villain. We've seen him in Casino Royale. He was a fantastic villain in that. He was brilliant in, it's a Danish film called Jagten, which translates to The Hunt. If you've never watched The Hunt, go and watch it. It's this fantastic Danish film, and he gives one of the best performances I've ever seen from an actor ever. So he's a really good actor, Mads Mikkelsen. And I just feel like his character's a little bit wasted in this film. The character's not really developed very well. His whole motivation is basically trying to embrace the dark dimension powers that he's getting from this page that he stole from a book, and then trying to expose the Ancient One for her using powers from the dark dimension herself. So the character, I don't think, is very good in that sense. I don't think his motivations are very good. I don't think they link well with the main character either. And it drags the film down when he's on screen. Even though Mads Mikkelsen's a fantastic actor and I like seeing him in films, I just think the worst part of this film is when it tries to introduce the villain more and spend more time on the villain. I just don't think the character is a very good villain for me. So I think one of my favourite characters in this film, and one of my favourite characters from the MCU, for me, has to be Mordo. The character of Mordo, played by Chiwetel Ejiofor, is fantastic. The character for me, and why I love the character and why him being in this film and playing the character the way he does makes Doctor Strange better, is because of the character of Chiwetel Ejiofor. The actor that he is, the character that he is, the personality he brings, the way the character's written, the character motivations. He feels betrayed. He feels almost lied to by the Ancient One. And you feel the resentment slowly building up throughout the film that he has towards Strange and the Ancient One. You see it throughout the film. Even at the end when he's helping fight Caecilius, you really feel that it's starting to brew a little bit. And I can't wait to see him in the next Doctor Strange film to see where they take the character. But for me in this film, I think he's the best character in this film from start to finish. He's a character that starts off kind of like this kind of guardian angel type of character for Doctor Strange. He's the one who kind of guides him through things and introduces him to this world in a way. And that's great. Like, he's very good at that. But then you start to see the little things that Chiwetel does throughout the film. His little changes in the way he says certain lines, the way he looks at the other characters around him. You feel this resentment brewing, and it works so well throughout the film. And then obviously at the end, we get the scene in the end credits, where he does the, too many sorcerers thing, and he's basically gone rogue in a way. So I can't wait to see where the character goes in the future. He's fantastic in this film, one of my favourite parts of the film. And if you've not seen Chiwetel in other things, definitely watch him in this, because it's a good demonstration of his acting ability in a subtle way. Not something that's out there as, say, 12 Years a Slave. If you want to see Chiwetel give a very subtle performance as far as his change from one character trait to another, Doctor Strange is a good advent for that. So away from that, BD Wong is very good as Wong. Rachel McAdams is good, even though I think the love story is a little bit unnecessary. That kind of drama, I don't think this film needed it. And those scenes drag the film down a little bit. They're a bit boring. They're a little bit underdeveloped. You don't really feel that these characters even like each other that well. it just feels very unnecessary, very Thor and Jane like, but not anywhere near as bad as that. But as far as a love story that feels unnecessary and a love story that doesn't feel believable, I'd say this kind of goes along that one. So in conclusion, I'd say about Doctor Strange, it's very, very good visually. The visual effects are fantastic. The cinematography is good. The creativity in the film is there for all to see. It's a very creative film visually. The action sequences are very unique. Some of the performances are really good. However, I think the film is dragged down a little bit by a very familiar copy and paste type of story, a lead character that we don't really feel anything for, and a very unlikable main character of that. A bit of a poor love story and a poor villain as well doesn't help. But away from that, I do think it's a decent film. It feels more like it is a phase one type of film. But I do still enjoy it, and it's still a decent watch. I just don't think it's up there as far as MCU films that are like top quality. I wouldn't put Doctor Strange anywhere near like something like an Iron Man, or even anywhere close to even like an Iron Man 3. I wouldn't even put it anywhere near that. So it's kind of that middle road where like kind of where the first Thor is. I'd say it's just a little bit better than that, but I wouldn't say it's much different though. I'd say it's around that. But getting on to the next film in Marvel's Phase 3, and that is going to be talking about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is a weird one for me because when I first watched this film, I hated it. When I first watched Guardians 2, I hated it. And you'll probably be wondering, why did I hate it? Because you liked the first Guardians. And I did. I really liked the first Guardians. I think it was fantastic. The first time I watched it, I think it was the overabundance of this wacky humour that bugged me to the point where it ruined the rest of the film for me. And even though it's there a little bit, even now when I watch it, I can appreciate it a little bit more. But that point is still prevalent for me. I just don't think it's as strong as it was. Like, I wouldn't say I hate this film anymore. It's not that bad. Is it as good as the first one? Nowhere near. Nowhere near is it as good as the first one. The only way it's better than the first one for me is that it's better visually. It's a bit better visually. It's a bit more colourful. It's a little bit more ambitious in its visual style. It's a little bit more creative. But away from that, I don't think it's anywhere near as good as the first one. I don't think the characters are as good as they were in the first one. I don't think the character development is as well as it was done as well as it was in the first one. The villain's way a lot better though. I will say that for Guardians 2, it is definitely better when it comes to the villain. The villain feels more linked in towards the main characters, especially obviously Star-Lord with the ego being his dad and that. So that kind of links in more. And that storyline plays out very well, and it helps build sympathy for the main character. And that's one thing I'll say, what works really well with the villain, played by Kurt Russell. I really think the strongest point of the villain in this film is that it really helps to ground Star-Lord a little bit more, make him very relatable, make him more sympathetic as a main protagonist. And he works really well in this film, Kurt Russell, by the way. Sometimes he feels a little bit cheesy, and again, this comes back to the overuse of this wacky humour that James Gunn does in this film. It's a little bit too much sometimes. It's a little bit too much sometimes, but most of the time it works. And even though the villain can be a little bit cheesy, he still has enough of a presence there and enough of a well-developed story with the main character that it works. He works as a villain. He works really well as a villain. And in all fairness, I mean, the MCU, the one problem I'll say throughout the entire series up to this point is that the villains aren't great. Most of the villains are very underwhelming. The only really good pure villains that we've had would be like Loki, really. I'd say probably Loki. Ultron may be at a push, even though I think they misused Ultron a little bit. And that's it really, as far as like a really memorable villain and a villain that works well within the story. I don't think it works as well as other series do. But in that being said, I do think Kurt Russell is a very good villain for this film. He works well within the story. The music's also very good. Again, you have to talk about the music when you talk about the Guardians films. The music works really well. James Gunn does really well in blending the music in with the story so it doesn't feel out of place. And that's very prevalent here again. The music really helps to set the tone for the film. This very enjoyable, rompous kind of roller coaster ride of a film that Guardians is. It really helps to make that feel. It adds towards that feeling of the film and adds towards that tone. So that's one of the very strong things I'll say, is that the music is brilliant. Also, Batista is hilarious in this film. When I talked about the wacky humour, the one positive that kind of brings to the film is Dave Batista as Drax. I think Dave Batista as Drax is phenomenal in this film. I think he's very good in this film. And even though some of the things he does are a little bit too much, a little bit too cheesy, a little bit over the top, it's still really funny. Like, he plays it so dry and serious that it works. Like, it works so well in the film. And he's hilarious. And also, I really like the character, the storyline between Nebula and Gamora. That works really well. And it sets up what we see later as well in Infinity War and Endgame between those two characters. But in this film, it works really well. The character of Nebula is treated really well in this film. She's developed really strongly. You feel sorry for her character a lot, and that helps to really ground this character, because in the first film she was just a bit of an interference, really, where in this film she feels more linked in towards the story. You get more scenes of her and Zoe Saldana together, and you kind of understand more of their backstory together. So that works really well. Those two characters are treated really well. All the characters are, in a way. I just don't think the characters are treated as well as they were in the first film. Bradley Cooper's still very distracting as Rocket. I'll still say this. I don't think he works well in these films. He's so distracting. And a lot of people, I mean, you might listen to this and think, what am I on about, right? But for me, it bugs me. It bugs me a lot. And it's mainly because I just don't, when I hear him, it just sounds like, you can tell he's recording his lines separate from the other actors. Like, it's so obvious. It's so obvious that he's recording his lines away from everybody else, because he speaks on such a different tone and such a different energy to the rest of the cast that it stands out really badly. And the accent is just really distracting as well. This kind of really strong, like Brooklyn, New York accent, right? It's very distracting and it bugs me, and it really grinds on me throughout the film. Even though the character is good, I like the character of Rocket Raccoon, I just don't like Bradley's performance in this film and throughout his entire run as Rocket Raccoon. It's very distracting. So those are the main kind of topics that I wanted to talk about when it came to Guardians Volume 2. Very fun film, very enjoyable, very good villain. I like the character development of Star-Lord. I like the character development of Nebula and Gamora. The music's fantastic, and it's a better visual film. I just don't think the story is as interesting for the main group and their development as characters. But I still like it. I wouldn't say it's as good as the first Guardians, but I don't think it's too far off. And like I said, when I first watched it, I hated it. Now I don't mind it, and I actually kind of like it. So it's one of those films that grows on me more times I watch it. But overall, I kind of say it's on the level of like an Iron Man 3. It's not as good as the first one, but it's almost as good. It's almost there. nearly, just not as good. Right, talking about the next film in Marvel Phase 3, and we're getting through these. We're on the 4th film, even though Marvel's Phase 3 is massive. There's like loads of films in this. It's like 11 films or something. It's so huge. But we'll get on to the next one in this group of films, and that is talking about Spider-Man Homecoming. Now we get good, guys. Now we get to the good stuff. This is the best ever Spider-Man film. And I'll describe my point in a bit. Sorry. I just really needed a drink. I forget how much it dries your throat out talking this long. It's really annoying, but... Right, that's better. Okay, yeah, talking about Spider-Man Homecoming. Like I said, this is one of the best films in the MCU. It's the best Spider-Man film ever made. It's the best version of Spider-Man that we've ever got in any form of media ever. Strong, I know. But for me, Tom Holland is the best ever version of Spider-Man. The version that Tobey Maguire did means more to me because it was my first introduction to the character of Spider-Man. So nostalgia is very strong there. But when you talk about the character of Peter Parker and what he represents, I would think in a modern context, I don't think anyone has ever played that character better than Tom Holland. I think he's fantastic in this role. Obviously, we saw him a little bit in Civil War, and he shined in Civil War. He's one of the best parts of the film, but he just wasn't in it that long, and he kind of felt tacked on and a bit unnecessary. In this film, we get the kind of link between Civil War. We learn more about the character. We learn more about his backstory and the people around him and the relationships between the people around him. And he's fantastic in this film. He brings such a childish wonder to the role, such an immaturity and such a childish energy to the role we've never saw before. Like, Tobey's version was very much the 1960s version of Peter Parker, right? He was very kind of the typical nerd. You know what I mean? He was the typical nerd and felt very out of place in a 2002 context when you look back. And even at the time, I think most people probably would have said that. He didn't feel like he fit into a modern version of what this character should be. He felt like the classic version, but he didn't work well within the modern context of the film. The version of Andrew Garfield just wasn't Peter Parker for me. Like, that just was not the character of Peter Parker at all. He was too confident, he was too cocky, he was too arrogant, and that's not what the character of Peter Parker is. This version of the character is perfect. Getting away more from the representation of the actual character of Spider-Man because I want to talk about the overall film. This film is brilliant in every way. I'd say probably this is the third best film in the MCU, personally. I'd say this is the third best film in the MCU behind Winter Soldier and Infinity War. And the reason for that, I think, is just because of how well the story's developed, how well the characters are developed, the fact it doesn't take itself too seriously, the fact that it embraces the kind of cheesy nature of Spider-Man in a way and embraces the kind of childish wonder that Spider-Man is. Like, the character is represented not as this all-conquering hero like a Captain America or an Iron Man. You really believe that this is just some random kid who has been kind of cursed with these powers and wants to do good because he's just a nice kid who wants to do good. Like, it's not this burden on him. He enjoys being Spider-Man. He has such a love for what he's doing and an energy for what he's doing, and because he feels like it's like the right thing to do. And I think that character development for Spider-Man and the character of Peter Parker works really well. Originally, when I watched this film, I thought that Robert Downey Jr.'s involvement in this film would have took away a little bit from the character of Spider-Man. Like, it would have been a bit distracting. Sorry, I need to stretch out, guys. Oh my God. It's so hard lying on this bed. I can't wait to get this desk. I'm telling you, I can't wait for it. It kills me lying on here. But that character is really, really good. Someone just wrote in the live chat, Fabricio. Thank you, Fabricio. Hello to you. Hello from Brazil, Rio de Janeiro. Well, hello to you too. That's cool. I've got someone from Brazil watching my podcast. That's cool. But yeah, talking about Spider-Man Homecoming, it's not just the character of Spider-Man that served really well, though. The character of Vulture, Adrian Toomes, played by Michael Keaton, that character is perfect in this film. This is the second best villain in the entire MCU. This is the second best villain in the film, in the entire series. And why is he the best villain in the series? Not because he's this all-powering god or this destructive tyrant. He's molded into the story so well. He molds into the story so well. He has good motivations. He has solid motivations there from the start. The first scene of the film is introducing the character of Adrian Toomes. So you can tell that a lot of this film is going to be centered around this character. You're going to see a lot of this film is centered around who this character is, what's his motivations, what's his link towards the main character, what's his overall involvement in the larger scale of the MCU. And the character of Adrian Toomes ticks all those boxes. He's visually well represented. The character of Vulture is brought well into the modern day, I think, really well. His character, the visual style of him looks really good. Like visually, the design of the costume, it's brought into a modern context really well. The way he kind of leads this underground, like black market group that deal with discarding and selling on these weapons that have been found, this alien tech that's been found from the previous disasters caused in the MCU films, like in Age of Ultron and the first Avengers, and they kind of use all this technology, this alien technology, and sell it on the black market for profit. And then obviously it's linked really well with the character of Peter Parker, because Peter basically has this massive crush on his daughter, who they go to the same school, and Peter wants to ask her out to this homecoming dance. And unfortunately for Peter, her dad is Adrian Toomes, the Vulture, who Spider-Man has already encountered various times at this point throughout the film. So you want that scene, the scene for me that confirms Michael Keaton to be one of the best villains in the MCU, is that scene in the car. That scene in the car with Peter and Adrian. They're sitting in the car, and then he knows then. He slowly learns who this character is. It's on their way to the homecoming dance. He's driving them there. His daughter and Peter. His daughter leaves the car. He has a little bit of a word with Peter, right? Kind of framing it as like, let me give him the dad talk. And then he goes really like dark and makes Peter feel so uncomfortable. And the way Michael Keaton plays him, this very serious, stern, intimidating, presence that he brings. It's one of my favorite scenes in all of the MCU. That scene in the car where he threatens Peter, you feel so scared. Like, I'd feel terrified. I'd feel terrified if that was me. I'd be on edge. If that was me, it'd be terrifying. He brings such an intimidating presence in this film, even though he's like an old man, even though he's, he hasn't got superpowers. It's just the way Keaton performs in this role that makes the character probably better than he would have been. I think if you give this character to another actor less established than Michael Keaton, it doesn't have the same impact. It doesn't have that impact because he plays it perfectly throughout the film. So I really like the villain in this film. This is the third. Well, yeah, I'd say this is the second best villain in all the MCU. Better than Loki, better than Ego. Not as good as Thanos, but definitely the second best in this series. And I can't wait to see him come back in the future if he does come back. I hope he does. I hope we see him. He was in the Morbius trailer, so that's very interesting because they're not technically part of the same universe, but are they going to be in the same universe at some point? That'll be interesting to see. And I hope we get to see more of his character because I love Keaton's performance. Jacob Batalon is brilliant as Ned as well. He's such an upgrade on any other kind of Spider-Man companion that we've seen before, as far as like the guy in the chair, right? He's kind of sidekick character. He's so funny and charming. You believe their friendship. Him and Tom Holland have brilliant chemistry. Zendaya's really good as a version of MJ. It's not really Mary Jane, but she kind of is that role in the film. So that's good. She's brilliant in the film. Like I said, Michael Keaton's a fantastic villain. All the little side characters, like all the teachers at Peter's school, the other kind of classmates that he has, they all play this brilliant role in this film. It grounds the film as well. It makes this film feels like the most down-to-earth MCU film. It feels like the most real. It feels like the most grounded MCU film because it's so small scale as well. Even though we have the backdrop of the Avengers in the background and Tony Stark in the background of the film and that kind of presence in the film, it feels like the most down-to-earth and realistic film that we've got in this series for a very long time. Probably since the first Iron Man for me, really. As far as just a film that feels so grounded in reality and feels so relatable, he does it perfectly. John Watts deserves credit for me for what he did with this character, especially the fact that this character was treated, in my opinion, so badly for so long by Sony, from Spider-Man 2 onwards. This character was treated so badly. It's nice to see the character get treated the way a character like Spider-Man should be treated. So I love this film. I love the visual effects. I think the film visually looks really good. I like the costume design. I like the music. I like all the characters. I like the villain. I don't really have a bad word to say about Spider-Man Homecoming. Like I'm trying to think of, except from the color grading again, which is a problem. But apart from that, I don't really have a standout problem with this film. Oh my God, it's killing me on this bed. Yeah, I don't really have a standout issue, really. I don't really have. There's nothing coming to mind for me about Spider-Man Homecoming that really sticks out as a negative. Like, this is one of the most rewatchable films in all of the MCU. I mean, you're fair, to disagree with me if you want to, but I don't think it's as good of a film as Winter Soldier. But I'd say it's the third best film in the MCU. I really would. This is the third best film in the MCU. I'd say it's Winter Soldier, Infinity War, Spider-Man Homecoming. Then probably the first Iron Man, maybe. I'm not sure. But it definitely goes like that for me. I think it's a brilliant film. It's really rewatchable. It's so fun, light-hearted, enjoyable. It's just fantastic. And Tom Holland's a brilliant Spider-Man as well. So I'm glad we got him in the role. I'm glad he was chosen over other actors because I think he really perfects this character. And I can't wait to see him in the next Spider-Man film because with the casting news we've got from that film, I'm so excited to see what's going to happen with that film. Hopefully it's not the last time we see Tom Holland in the role, but if it is, I'm pretty sure it's going to be a big way to go. Right, away from Spider-Man Homecoming, we're going to go on to the next film in the MCU, and that is talking about Thor Ragnarok. Thor Ragnarok, directed by Taika Waititi, taking on a series of films that have probably been the most underwhelming, boring, lackluster films in the series, in the broader MCU, right? I think most people would probably agree with me on that. I would definitely say I think the first Thor film is very, very flawed. as is the second one. The second one's probably the most boring film out the entire MCU. So the fact that Taika Waititi came along and changed the entire tone of this Thor series, he deserves so much credit. He deserves so much credit. This film takes what worked in the other Thor films, keeps it, develops on it, expands on it, and then gets rid of all the things that we don't want, all the things we didn't like. There's no more forced, awkward Jane love story. There's no annoying side characters. There's no forced cookie cutter villain with a bad backstory. Like, everything in this film works really well, I think. Yeah, I would. I'd say more or less everything in this film works really well for me. I think the best part of this film is the humour. This film is 100% Taika Waititi. 100%. From the visual style, from the tone of the film, the performances the actors give, this film screams Taika Waititi. Like, if you want to watch a Taika Waititi film, watch Thor Ragnarok, because it's 100% the director's vision, and you can feel it. Like, if you watch this film compared to the first and second Thor films, it feels like a completely different series. The first Thor film was so boring and underwhelming. The love story was awful. Like, honestly, the Dutch angles, like, don't get me started on the Dutch angles. Thor: The Dark World was just as bad, if not worse. This just embraces the fact that, look, this is a series that we've took probably a little bit too seriously in the past. Let's just have fun with it. Let's just have fun with it. And I don't think we would have got this film if it weren't for a film like Guardians. I think what James Gunn did with Guardians, Taika takes that kind of out of this world, weird kind of space film, adds Thor into that, adds Hulk into that, adds Loki into that, adds all these weird, unique characters like Korg and Meek and Valkyrie and like Scourge and all these characters, and you add all that together and you get a very fun, enjoyable Thor film, which is a sentence that I would never have thought I would have said before Thor Ragnarok. Because up to this point, Thor was the most boring character in the entire MCU for me. He weren't relating with me at all. And I think for most people, like, if it weren't for the fact that Chris Hemsworth is Chris Hemsworth, I think most people would have just given up with the character of Thor because he just was so boring and uninteresting. This just strips that away, and it says, look, we've got this actor in Chris Hemsworth. He's very funny. He's very charming. You know, let's just embrace that. And Taika Waititi does that. And the fact that they took a gamble on a director who was, you know, an indie director at the time, not very well established as far as big major blockbusters go. It was ambitious, but my God, it worked. My God, it worked, and it worked so well. This feels like a mix of James Gunn, Wes Anderson, like, it's got such a unique kind of tone to it. And I'd probably say it's the most unique film in the MCU just for the fact that it's just not taken seriously at all. Like, this film, I mean, come on, you see Hulk's arse in this film, guy. Who thought I would have wanted to see, like, Hulk's arse? And I still don't think I do want to see that. But you see, like, even the character of Bruce Banner is like, this is the best the character has been treated since that first Hulk film. Well, no, actually, I'll take that back. I think this is the best the character's been treated since the Avengers. Like, I think even though they try and make him a little bit too funny, I think that's the one thing I'll say about this film. I think all the things that when it tries to be dramatic, it doesn't work. When this film tries to be a dramatic film or embrace the more dramatic side, it doesn't work. When it tries to be a serious film, when it tries to be scary, when it tries to give exposition, it doesn't work. I don't think Taika's very good at that. Taika Waititi. I don't think he's very good at that. But what he is good at is the comedy. This film is so funny, guys. Honestly, this film is hilarious. Jeff Goldblum in this film kills me. Chris Hemsworth's hilarious in the film. Everyone is. And even Taika Waititi himself, he plays Korg. And some of the dialogue, that's the scene where they're talking about the hammer pulling Thor off. Every time I watch that, I just find it funny. Like, I just... oh, God, it's so funny. I know, it's like... It's just a funny film. The more I think about this film, the more I like it because it's so funny. But I think the reason I wouldn't have it, like, say on the level of, Spider-Man Homecoming, for example, I just don't think the film meshes the drama well with the comedy. I don't think the character of Bruce Banner is treated, even though he's treated well. I think sometimes they try and make him a bit too funny. I think they should have made him like the straight man of the film. And I think him with Hemsworth could have worked really well with Thor being more jokey in this film, more like light-hearted in the film. I think that could have worked a little bit better. The character of Hela is good. Her motivations are there 100%. Her motivations, like Odin banished her for years and years because she became a bit of a tyrant after, Odin was the one who made her a tyrant in the first place. So that kind of motivation for her is there. Her motivation's there 100%. Sorry, guys, I'm so tired. I'm very tired today. I don't know why. I just feel really shattered. It might be because it's sunny. I don't know. I'm very tired today. But away from me being tired, I definitely think Thor Ragnarok is a little bit underwhelming when it comes to the dramatic elements. However, it doesn't ruin the comedy. It doesn't ruin the film. The dramatic scenes do still work for me. They're just not as strong as the comedy elements. But when the film, most of the time, it is trying to be funny, it's a full-blown comedy. When it's trying to do that, there's not really many films in the MCU that can come anywhere close to it, in my opinion. So, Thor Ragnarok, a very, very funny film. One of my favourite films out of the MCU. And a film that I think if you haven't watched for a while, go back and watch it because I think you'll very, very much enjoy it like I did. It's a very entertaining film. One of my favourite films from the MCU, 100%. As far as like a level where I'd put it probably just underneath the first Iron Man. Maybe. Or maybe on a level with Iron Man 3. Maybe. Because of the lack of solidness in the dramatic elements. Because they're not equal to the comedy elements. Maybe I'd say it's on that kind of level. But I'm not sure. I'd probably have to watch it again to get a better understanding of that. Okay, right, guys. Away from Thor Ragnarok, let's get on to a film that's going to be a controversial topic. And that is talking about Black Panther. Now, I probably didn't set out very well because you're going to thinking, like, what's he got to say about the fact that this film got nominated for Best Picture is an absolute disgrace. This film, I love Ryan Coogler. I love all of the films he's done. I love Fruitvale Station. I love the first Creed film. This film, for me, is a weird one because there's a lot of things I love about Black Panther. I love, I can't say her name. Like, is it Danai Guraya? I don't know her name. I can't pronounce her name. But the bald kind of leader of the Dora Milaje, she's brilliant in this film. She's amazing in this film. I really like the character of Shuri as well, T'Challa's sister. I love that character. She's brilliant as well. I like the look of Wakanda. I think they represent Wakanda really well. This is something that's been building up really since like the first Captain America film. So it's something that's been kind of planted. The seed's been planted for this film for so long, and I think they represent Wakanda really well. However, this film, it's kind of mediocre, in my opinion. And there's a lot of reasons why. The story is not very engaging at all. I think some parts of it are. I just think it's a story that we've already seen done better before. This film is basically The Lion King. Like, it literally is The Lion King. It's the exact same film as The Lion King. It's the young prince who's, when his father dies, has to get, he's forced onto the throne and then gets challenged for the throne. Everyone thinks he's dead because he loses. Everyone thinks he's dead. He's in exile for a long amount of time, and then he has to come back and fight for the throne again. It's the same film as The Lion King. Like, it really is. And the fact that this is a story we've kind of already seen just kind of makes it feel a little bit underwhelming. And if it had a unique take on it, fair enough. But it definitely is The Lion King. Like, you can't ignore those comparisons because they're very strong. The comparisons between this and The Lion King are very strong. Away from that, though, this has some of the worst visual effects in the MCU. The visual effects in this film, for me, are terrible. They are so bad. The visual effects in Black Panther are terrible. I don't see... People say the visual effects are really good in this film. I think they are shocking. I'm not just talking about the end fight scene, right, with Killmonger. I'm not just talking about that, even though that in itself is terrible. I'm talking about the backgrounds, the CGI people in backgrounds, the environments, the action sequences. The visual effects in this film are terrible. They are so bad. They feel so glossy, and they lack kind of detail. They lack depth in the images. And whether this comes back down again to the visual style, the fact that this is shot in film and the blacks don't really pop and there's not a lot of colour, maybe that's part of the reason why the visual effects don't look so good. But the visual effects in this film are terrible. That end scene with Killmonger, the action scene in the underground vibranium tunnel, right? That scene. The visual effects in that scene are dog shit. Dog shit. Terrible. I remember watching it in the cinema and thinking, oh my God, this is awful. It's like watching a video game cutscene from the mid-2000s on the original Xbox. It's that bad. Honestly, it feels really glossy. The characters don't have any weight to them. Their movements seem unnatural. It just looks awful. The colours, the shadows, the lighting, everything off. Terrible. And whether this comes back to the fact that Ryan Coogler is very inexperienced when it comes to visual effects. Most of his films are filmed very realistic, a lot of in-camera things, little tricks here and there, when he does his big one-shot scenes. But apart from that, his scenes don't really specialise in heavy visual effects. This film has a lot of visual effects, and a lot of them are terrible. So, again, it comes back to this thing, right, is the story good enough to kind of distract from that? And in my opinion, it's not. It's not. The story isn't as engaging as, say, a Thor Ragnarok or a Spider-Man Homecoming or even a Civil War. The story isn't anywhere near as good as that. I feel this film is loved more for its political statement than it is for the quality of the film. That's my controversial hot take, right? That's it there. The reason this film was nominated for Best Picture was not because of the quality of the film. it was because of the political kind of socio-economic drive that this film had, right? That's the reason this film got nominated for Best Picture. This film got nominated for Best Picture because it was influential to a lot of African heritage people, right? A lot of black people. That's what this film really is aiming for. And I understand it. I get it. Like, I'm being nominated for Best Picture just feels like it's pandering to that audience a little bit. It's pandering to the people who were up in arms that we've never got a black superhero film nominated for anything, right? That kind of feels like what this is. This feels more like the Academy trying to say, look how diverse we are. Look how much we've changed. Like, we nominate black people when for years and years they didn't nominate jack shit when it came to black people. Whether it was black actors, black directors, they always got kind of snubbed when it comes to things like this. So I don't want to hear that from the Academy, because it feels like they're just trying to say it was an advert for them to say, look how diverse we are, look how with the times we are. I think as a film, there is nowhere near. There is so many better black kind of inspired, cultured films than the Boys in the Hood. Way better. Straight Outta Compton. Way better than Black Panther. Those films on its own, way better. Were they nominated for Best Picture? I don't think so. Maybe Boys in the Hood might have been. I don't think it was, though. But even so, they aren't as loved as Black Panther. And they should be, because I think they're a better advert for that than Black Panther. So that's not a comment on the film itself. That's just a comment on the fact that this film was nominated for Best Picture. Because you can't say to me that this film should have been nominated for Best Picture over a film like Logan or a film like The Dark Knight. Because there's nowhere near. You can't even compare the two. You can't compare those films to this. They're on a different level. Even Winter Soldier. I think if any film in the MCU should have got nominated for Best Picture, it should have been either Winter Soldier or Infinity War. Those are the only two films I say should have been nominated for Best Picture in their respective year. This, no. Black Panther, no. Nowhere near. For me, if I was talking about having it on a level with a certain film, I'd probably say I'd have it on the level of like an Iron Man 2. I just really don't think it's that great. I think it's good. I think it's okay. There's some funny moments in the film. I think that the Wakandan culture visually and through its story are represented very well. I think that I just don't think it's really that great, guys. Everyone always says about how good Michael B. Jordan is in this film. This is one of the worst performances Michael B. Jordan has ever given. He's awful in this. I think the character of Killmonger is a decent character. I like the character. I like the fact that his character arc is basically like, I've been repressed my whole life by white people. I want to free all the black people and take over the white people with the black people that I've freed. That's this film basically is an allegory for like slavery and basically black people overthrowing white people. And I get that. I get that kind of story that this film's going for and the character of Killmonger is going for. I just don't think that Michael B. Jordan plays it very well. I think he's a bit too over the top. He's too cheesy. It's almost like he was too kind of suave and cool in a way, where I feel that this character should have been a lot more serious, a lot more intense than what we got. I just don't think the performance matched the character, in my opinion. I could be so wrong on this. Like I said, films are subjective. There's no objective way to judge a film. Everyone has their own opinions when it comes to a film. If you say a film's good, I say a film's bad, none of us are wrong, because it's all our own opinion, right? And that's my opinion on Black Panther. I just don't think it's as good as people say it is. I don't even think Chadwick Boseman is great in this film either. And obviously we've got more context now because of what we know he was going through at the time. So that adds more context into this. But at the time, watching it, I just thought he didn't look good. And I remember when I first watched this film, I always felt like something was wrong with Chadwick Boseman. I don't know what it was. It was the performance. He looks so like tired and dejected and a little bit like he doesn't have that same energy that he had for Civil War. And whether that's from the director Ryan Coogler or whether it was because of what he was going through with his battle with cancer, either two, I don't know which one it was. But you have to just this is a film, and we have to take the film for what it was. What I've been given in front of me is what I'm seeing. And I just don't think the performance was very good. Andy Serkis was very over the top, but funny, and he brought a bit of levity to the film, I guess. The action scenes were good. Like there were that one shot scene was good. I like that scene. That scene was good. The other action set piece I don't think was very good. Again, it's ruined because of the visual effects. The visual effects in this film are so bad. I'm sorry. The visual effects in this really, really ruined most parts of this film for me. The music's quite good as well. I'll say that. The music's quite good. But away from that, really, I don't think this film's that great. It's very mediocre. It's very middle of the road Marvel for me. So, in conclusion, about Black Panther, the best parts of this film are the music, some of the performances, and some of the characters I do like. I like the message the film gives across, and I like the thematic concept of the story. I just don't like the execution of the story. I don't like the main character really that much. And the performance that Chadwick gave. I don't like the villain. I hate the visual effects. They're awful. So really, Black Panther for me, controversial maybe. I just don't think this film should have got anywhere near the praise that it did. But it did, so maybe I'm definitely in the minority with this. But for me, I'd say it's a little bit lower there than a lot of other films. And again, this isn't because it's a film focused on black people, so I don't want to hear all that nonsense. It's all bollocks if people are saying that, because that's not correct. This film, my criticism of this film is not racially motivated at all, so I don't want to hear all that nonsense. I'm judging this as a film on itself, and those are my problems with the film, is the actual filmmaking itself and the story. So, because you can't seem to criticize a film nowadays without people saying there's always a motive behind what you're doing. So I feel it's important to clarify that before people get the wrong idea. But definitely for me, Black Panther, middle of the road Marvel at best. So going on from Black Panther, now we get on to Avengers Infinity War, one of my most anticipated films of all time, I have to say. And I was not disappointed. Avengers Infinity War was fantastic. There's not really much I can say about this film that hasn't already been said by hundreds of thousands of people. Avengers Infinity War is the second best film in the MCU, only just under Winter Soldier, but it's very close. It's very, very close. What I like about this film is just how kind of down it is, man. This film feels so different from anything else that we've got in the MCU. It's still funny. It's still got the MCU charm. It's still got the MCU tone. It's still got all of that. The one thing it doesn't have is this over-the-top energy and positivity. This film, for a lot of it, is kind of depressing, and in a good way. In a good way. It's very intense. It's very sad. It keeps you on the edge of your seat, and it's enjoyable throughout. And the main reason for that is because of Josh Brolin as Thanos. Josh Brolin's performance as Thanos was unbelievable. And up to this point, you have to remember... Oh, sorry. I had an itchy nose. Yeah, up to this point, remember, we'd only saw him very sporadically in the MCU. Obviously, he didn't play the character at the end of Avengers, so I can't count that. But we saw him for like one scene in Guardians of the Galaxy, and we saw him in the end credits of Avengers Age of Ultron. So we barely got anything of him so far. He was always in the shadows, always kind of, you could feel his presence growing film on film, but he never really had much influence on the films at all, up until this point. Josh Brolin is incredible in this film, and it's not just down to the visual effects, which are fantastic. These are some of the best visual effects in any MCU film. Probably, overall, I'd say these are the best visual effects. The character design of Thanos, the detail in the effects, the small little details, the character, the facial animations, everything for Thanos visually is incredible. But it's Brolin's performance that comes through the motion capture and comes through the facial scans and really embodies Thanos with the character that Josh Brolin wanted to portray. Thanos is the main character of Infinity War. And that's why it feels so different. Because we've never really focused on the villain much in any MCU film. That's been the one criticism I have really through all of the MCU, with the exception of Loki in the Avengers and Thor: The Dark World, and maybe Ultron a push, a very, very small push, but Ultron maybe, and definitely Vulture, and maybe Ego too, but more, really the main two for me is Loki and Vulture. Away from those, we haven't really had a standout villain. You look through all of the MCU. Jeff Bridges, he was good when he was Obadiah Stane. Just the Ironmonger thing ruined it for me. That was terrible, and it ruined it for me, in my opinion. Tim Roth was, again, great when he was Emil Blonsky. I just don't think he was... The Abomination thing was done very well at all. Loki in the first Thor film was terrible. Red Skull, underdeveloped, underused, in my opinion. Malekith, worst villain, one of the worst villains in the history of film. Terrible, terrible villain. You had the Aldrich Killian, terrible villain. Mandarin, underused and wrongly used, in my opinion. Winter Soldier didn't really have a main villain, really, because they all kind of kept chopping and changing over. So he didn't really have a main antagonist, really, in Winter Soldier. Ronan the Accuser was, again, terrible villain. Ultron, underused a little bit, even though I do like what they did with him. I think he was a little bit underused. Zemo, good character, but it didn't feel like a major threat to the Avengers. He was more a psychological threat. Caecilius, terrible villain. What else did we have? Ego was a good villain. I liked Ego. Vulture was fantastic. Killmonger wasn't a very good villain. Good villain, poor performance. I'll say that about Killmonger. But Thanos is incredible. Thanos is the villain we've been waiting for in the MCU to this point. And he's the main character of the film. Make no mistake about that. He's the main character from start to finish of this film. This film is basically about the triumph of Thanos. This way I come back to the tone of the film, the tone of the story, I'll say the tone of the story. When I said it was so sad and a bit down, a bit dreary, and a bit of because we just focus, the Avengers just lose badly in everything. They fail to stop Thanos getting the Infinity Stones. They constantly get beaten by Thanos' army. They constantly keep losing people close to them in this film. It's just this continual cycle of loss and pain, probably best shown through Thor. This is the best Thor we've ever got in the MCU as well. I'll say that. This is a good mix between the previous version of Thor that we got in the first two films and the first two Avengers films and the Taika version. So we get the cheesy, bumbling, idiot version of Thor that we got in Ragnarok. But we also get this really dark sadness and pain with Thor. in this film. Like he constantly looks like he's on the verge of crying. Like he looks like he's on the verge of a meltdown. And obviously this plays off in Endgame to mixed results, but I'll get onto that a bit later. But throughout Infinity War, the scenes we thought are some of the best scenes. Chris Hemsworth really is fantastic in this film. And I think if any of the MCU films other than Winter Soldier should have got... How this didn't get nominated for Best Picture and Black Panther did, I don't understand. This story is far better than Black Panther. But I won't go on another rant about Black Panther. But, Infinity War, from start to finish, it just feels like the inevitable is going to happen. And the inevitable is the Avengers just getting absolutely bollocked in this film. From start to finish, they just lose everything. There is a continual sense of dread coming from Thanos, and that comes from Josh Brolin. His performance is fantastic. It's not just the visual, incredible visuals for the character. It's not just the facial animations. It's the voice. It's the way he brings the lines through. It's the way he conveys emotion through his voice and the tone of voice he uses and his kind of intensity for the character, but also bringing a little bit of like sympathy and a bit of empathy towards the character. Like you see him cry. You see the main villain in a superhero film literally bawl in tears. Like seriously. When have we ever saw that in a Marvel film? When have we ever saw the villain cry? Other than Thanos in Infinity War. When have we ever seen that? And that's why he's such a good character. That's why he's the main focus of this film, because the character is so well developed. And you feel kind of conflicted towards Thanos. The whole story of him losing his planet, right? The whole thing he wanted to do was he saw the inevitable happening on his planet, the overpopulation, and he wanted to basically cut that down. You know, you kill millions to save billions, that kind of mentality. And it's a very relatable mentality in a way, because there's a lot of people today who think like that. The world's getting overpopulated. There's only so many resources. There's only so much resources for the people that we've got. And there's more people being added to the planet every day. There's not enough resources to go around. And eventually the planet will die out. And that's basically what Thanos his whole goal was, to save to basically get rid of, to cleanse the universe, right? To kill half the universe so the rest of it could thrive and flourish and survive. And that is such a compelling story for a villain. Like, it's not just a mustache twirling, you took something from me, so I must get revenge storyline that we've had throughout the entirety of the MCU, really. It's such a different story, and that's some of the best parts of the film. Away from Thanos, the other performances are incredible as well. The other performances are really good. Chris Evans is really good in the film, despite him really only being in the film a little bit, really. Like, he's not really a very prominent figure in the film. Robert Downey Jr. is brilliant as Tony Stark. Do I really have to say? Like, at this point, he can play this character in his sleep. The two have become so molded together, really, over the years. It's hard to differentiate the two. But he's fantastic in the film. Like I said, Hemsworth is incredible. Ruffalo, again, I don't really like what they do with... I don't like the story that they do with the Hulk. So that's the one thing personally in Infinity War I don't like. I don't like the direction they decided to take the character of the Hulk in. But away from that, he's okay in the film. He's decent. It's not his best performance. This is probably the worst performance he's given as the Hulk and as Bruce Banner. But it's not terrible. Like, it's not awful. I just don't think it's very good. It's average. It's a decent performance from Ruffalo. Benedict Cumberbatch is incredible as Doctor Strange. This is the best version of the character that we've got. It's just a shame we couldn't get this kind of performance that we got from him in his own film. Maybe because the character works better in small doses. Maybe he works better in an ensemble. Like, he had a very small role in Ragnarok, and he was very memorable in that. So maybe just the type of character that he is works better in a solo, not solo, like a group kind of story, an ensemble piece. He shines in this film. I mean, everyone's here. You've got Scarlett Johansson back as Black Widow. You've got Bradley Cooper back as Rocket. You have all the Guardians there. You have everyone, right? Again, I don't like Bradley Cooper as Rocket Raccoon, but I've already explained my feelings of that before, so I'm not going to go over that again. Zoe Saldana is really good as Gamora. Like, really, if you talk about the main characters of this film, like, who are the characters this film mainly focus on? It's Thanos, Thor, Tony Stark, and Gamora. Those are the four main characters of the film, really. When you think about who's the story mainly focused on, who are the main kind of story, who interconnects the story between each character, right? And those are the characters that do that. That's where the story flows through, and she's really good. Zoe Saldana in this film. I've not really spoken much about her in previous films because I think her performances, except from in Guardians 2, where her and Karen Gillan got good scenes together and their scenes really, that their characters got developed better. I don't think really she was the best part of the first Guardians film, but she's really good in this, and she shines in this, and she's really enjoyable to watch. Her character's really, you feel the struggle for this character because you can see she has a lot of love for Thanos, but she also has this hatred for him and this resentment towards him. And that kind of conflicting emotion is very, very interesting to watch. Her and Brolin play off each other really well. So those scenes are very interesting. All the action's very good as well. I even like the Battle of Wakanda. Even though I definitely still say, again, this film would have looked better with better colour grading. And if it wasn't all washed out with grey and brown colours, if we actually had good colour grading, then this would have looked way better. But take that out of the conversation. The actual choreography for the fighting and the action scenes and what we actually see in the action scenes are very good. I like what we got there. I like the build up to Thor coming to Wakanda, right? I like the fact that Black Panther kind of takes this leadership role and takes a stand, really. Like, this character, the version of Black Panther in this, again, like he was in Civil War, is a far better version than what we got in his solo film. I just think some characters work better in ensemble pieces, and Doctor Strange is one of them, and I think maybe Black Panther is another one. He works really well in this film, and he's better in small doses because the character really doesn't have a lot of depth there, really. The main focus of what this character is that he's a king. He's royalty. He's a royal figure. That's what he is. He's a leader of a country. He's a leader of a group, of a society of people. That's the whole point of what T'Challa is. His character doesn't really go further than that. So when you have the world threatened, he automatically is going to take a leadership role there. And he does. And he automatically takes that leadership role and he leads. He feels like he takes this step up. Him and Steve Rogers lead that whole group of warriors from Wakanda to fight Thanos' forces. And that scene on Wakanda is brilliant. I love that scene. Again, we just get this sense of loss and dread, at the end with Vision and Wanda, even though I still say up to this point, their relationship isn't developed very good. I still say that now. I think their relationship, really, except from what we got in WandaVision, right? But prior to WandaVision, I still think their relationship is a little bit forced and very underdeveloped. So it's a little bit underwhelming at the end when we see Wanda really struggling with what she has to do and Vision so conflicted about, potentially dying. And it's so weird. Like, I feel like they need more scenes together prior to this. But we didn't, and it's still a very good scene. You still feel sorry for the characters and they still get developed. The actual story between those characters get developed better later on. So with context, with everything that we've seen up to this point, going back to watch Infinity War, you feel more sympathy towards the characters. But putting that aside, taking it for what it is in itself, what we've seen up to this point, from the start of Phase 1 to Infinity War, that scene with Scarlet Witch, Thanos, the scene with Wanda, Thanos, and Vision, that could have been better if we had more development for Wanda and Vision before we actually got the show. So yeah, guys, I love Infinity War. It's my second favourite film out of the MCU. It's an absolute joy to watch. It's fun from start to finish, despite this dreary tone. It's the darkest tonally as far as the films that we've got so far in the MCU. You constantly feel this sense of dread, but it works. It works really well throughout the film, and I really do enjoy it. So if you've got any questions, guys, I just want to say this before we get onto the last few films of the MCU. If you have any movie-related questions that you want answered at the end of the show, I will answer them. I'll go through any questions that you have, whether it be related to the MCU or related to anything Marvel, anything film-related, anything you want your questions answered, I'll answer them at the end of the show. So that basically covers anything that you want to talk about, not just the topics that we've talked about today, but I'll get onto them after I've talked about the movies in the MCU Phase 3 that we're reviewing today. So after Infinity War, we go on to talk about the next film in the series, which is Ant-Man and the Wasp. This basically is a palate cleanser. And what I mean by that is, after what we got in Infinity War and how dark Infinity War was and the dreariness of Infinity War and how down Infinity War was and how flat it left people, like how down it left people after, we needed a palate cleanser before Endgame. This is that palate cleanser. This is a very by-the-numbers, average comedy film, really. I like it. I like Ant-Man and the Wasp. It's just very underwhelming, I think. I think this film should have took place before Infinity War. I've always said that, and I'll still say it now. Ant-Man and the Wasp definitely should have took place before Infinity War. I think the ending of the film with, Scott getting stuck in the quantum realm would have been a really good cliffhanger for the film. It would have kept us all on edge, like, what's going on, what's happened, like, what's going on, like, having that tension at the end of Ant-Man and the Wasp would have been so effective. I would have loved that. I would have really loved that. It would have been a really good ending, and it would have contextualized more why Scott wasn't playing a part in Infinity War. So that would have been better, I think, if we would have got that before Infinity War. But just taking it as a film as it is, it's fine. Like, Ant-Man and the Wasp is that generic, run-of-the-mill Marvel film. It just is. It's fine. It's funny. I don't think it's as good as the first Ant-Man. I don't think it's as good as the first Ant-Man as far as the creativity there. It feels a bit more bland and generic. But it's all right. Like, it's fine. There's not really much I can actually say about Ant-Man and the Wasp, really. Like, it's a decent story, I guess. Like, the story with Scott and his daughter, the story with, trying to find Janet Van Dyne in the quantum realm. That's really what this entire film's been building up towards. And that scene is played really well. I just think it's a little bit, there's really nothing I can say about Ant-Man and the Wasp. Like, it's fine. Like, music's fine. Action's fine. It's decently funny. Some of the dramatic elements are okay. The villain's okay. Like, I'm trying to find really to get into detail about Ant-Man and the Wasp, but I just feel so kind of stale on it. I just don't really have much to say about Ant-Man and the Wasp as far as going into like really big detail. It's just so run-of-the-mill MCU film. It's an Iron Man 2. It's an Incredible Hulk. It's that kind of standard generic Marvel film. It's nothing like Dark World. It's not that, right? It's not that bad. It's not the first Thor film where there's something that stands out so bad I just completely hate it. It's not that, right? It's not that at all. But it's definitely something that is a little bit meh. And when you have a film that's very meh, it just kind of there's not much you can say on Ant-Man and the Wasp. Is it a good film? It's decent. Give it a watch. I think it works better though if you watch it before Infinity War. I've watched it post Infinity War and pre Infinity War, and I feel it is more effective watching it before Infinity War than it is after. So if your viewing experience of Ant-Man and the Wasp, watching it in release order the way it isn't effective, try watching it before Infinity War, and I feel like it contextualizes more going forward. But it's okay. It's not bad. It's decent. It is what it is. Going on to the next film in the MCU, we are jumping into 2019 now and talking about Captain Marvel. Another film that is a weird one, similar to Doctor Strange, Captain Marvel. I feel in a very similar way to Captain Marvel that I do for Doctor Strange. And what I mean by that is this film, again, feels like a Phase 1 film. The way it's structured, the way it's laid out, it's a run-of-the-mill origin story. The worst thing about Captain Marvel is the character of Captain Marvel. That's the worst part of this film, is the character of Carol Danvers. And more specifically, the performance of Brie Larson. She is boring in this film. She is so boring in Captain Marvel. It just feels like she has no emotion. It feels like I'm watching a robot. She has no emotion in this film. She has this blank, serious stare throughout the entire film. Like, it's just so boring. She's just so boring. Like, I said before kind of where, before we had Infinity War, right, and before we had Thor Ragnarok, I said that the character of Thor was the most boring main character in the MCU. She's worse than that. She's boring. And she's boring because of the performance that Brie Larson gives. The actual character of Carol Danvers isn't actually that bad. The character's got some context there. The relationship between her and Nick Fury is interesting. This kind of fish out of water style, similar to what they did with Thor. The amnesia kind of storyline, trying to get her memory back, trying to remember who she was. It's a decent setup for an interesting story. The whole thing with the Skrulls, very interesting. I like all the things with the Skrulls. They're set up really well as this kind of, can you trust them? Can you not trust them? Are they villains? Are they not villains? Like, it kind of keeps this tension between good and bad, like who's right and wrong. And that kind of conflicting way of telling a story is interesting. And I like that with the Skrulls. The Skrulls are the best part of Captain Marvel for me. The Skrulls and Nick Fury are the best parts of Captain Marvel. The worst part is the main character. So, like I said before, if you don't like the main character, the film is underwhelming. It drags the film back because you spend a lot of time with the character of Carol Danvers, and I personally just didn't care. I just think she's not very good at emoting. She just feels so like lacking anything, really. I'm sorry. If you really like Captain Marvel, that's great. For me, I found it really underwhelming. I found the film was okay as far as the story went. There's some good ideas there. The action's pretty good. The visual effects are pretty decent, really. Some of them are really bad, like the effects for the cat, when it does the whole open mouth thing, you get this alien coming out of the cat thing. The visual effects for that are terrible. It looks like some weird early 2000s CGI Garfield horror show, right? It looks it's terrifying. It's the most terrifying thing in the MCU, seeing that cat turn into some weird subspecies creature. It's very strange. But definitely the worst part of the film is Brie Larson. So if you don't like the main character of Captain Marvel, it's going to be tricky to like the rest of the film. And I'm not blind to the other good points that are in this film. Like I said, some of the action's very good. Some of the effects are pretty good. I like the performance, some of the performances in the film. The story's decent. I just didn't like the main performance from Brie Larson, I'm afraid, and it just ruined the rest of the film, and it just made the film feel a little bit more underwhelming than it could have been if you had a better actress. Like if we had like an Emily Blunt in there, if we had like Emily Blunt's the one that most people go to, even like an Emma Stone. If we had an Emma Stone in there, like an actress who can actually like emote really strongly and has a lot of character in her personality. If we could have had that for Carol Danvers, I think it would have made that character a lot more interesting, a lot more relatable, a lot more likable, and make the overall film of Captain Marvel a bit more of an enjoyable experience than it was otherwise. But I might be in the minority of that. The film did really well at the box office, grossed over $1 billion. People seem to like it. People seem to like the message behind the film of the strong female character thing, which I think is a little bit overdone in this film. I think that there are better female characters in the MCU than Captain Marvel. Being a strong female character does not just mean being able to kick everyone's arse. Like there's more to that. Being a strong female character. The strongest female character in the series is Wanda, and that only gives context due to WandaVision. But before WandaVision, really, like maybe Natasha, maybe Black Widow, but at this moment, the best female character in the series is Wanda. But it's not just because she's so powerful; it's because she's got character. She's got conflicting emotions. She's strong, but she's vulnerable. She's fragile, but she's aggressive, and it's a brilliant mix of a character. So she's the best female character in the series. Carol Danvers, very underwhelming. Not really looking forward to her next film, to be honest. But I'll see how that turns out and see more of that when it comes to it. Right. After Captain Marvel, we get the film going. We get the film, and that is Avengers Endgame. Now, I can't remember if I briefly touched on Endgame in my other podcasts. I can't remember. Endgame is, I've said this before. I know I've definitely said this before. My two best ever cinema experiences that I've ever had, like watching a film in the cinema. So not the two best films I've ever had in this that I've watched in the cinemas before, but as far as my two best cinematic experiences is Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2 and Avengers Endgame. So you might be wondering, well, how come Avengers Endgame isn't the best film in the MCU? And I'll get on to that. But Avengers Endgame is the best experience in the MCU. And what I mean by that is this is a thrill ride of a film. It's a thrill ride of emotion. It's a thrill ride of storytelling, a thrill ride of humor and action and nostalgia and callbacks and action and interesting moments and fun moments and emotional moments. Nothing hits like Endgame. Nothing. If you've watched every single MCU film, if you've grew up with these films like I did, I was 11 years old when the first Iron Man came out. So I've grew up with these films. I'm 24 now, and I was, 22 when Endgame came out. So I've literally grew up with these films. They was a big part of my life growing up. So I grew up with these characters, really. I know these characters. I grew up to know these characters really well. You have that built-in emotion, and Endgame is the best payoff you could ever imagine. That and Deathly Hallows Part 2. But I'm not going to say which is better because I don't know. But Endgame is such an emotional experience if you follow the MCU. This is incredible payoff. It calls back to previous films in a respectful and enjoyable and fun way. It's an interesting kind of play on a time travel story. It brings back all the characters that we love. It builds characters' depth and emotions and development through especially characters like Black Widow, characters like Hawkeye, characters like Hulk. Even they get their own kind of flow through storyline. Characters like Valkyrie, like every character in this film gets a good payoff. Every single character in this film gets a good payoff. And that's what's good about Endgame when I say that this is the best payoff you could imagine for a franchise. And I know the MCU has continued post Endgame, but I think this is the best ending of this saga, right? The Infinity Saga, that kind of era of Marvel. It's such a brilliant ending in every way, and I love this film. However, is it perfect? Is it the best film in the MCU? No. No, it's not. And there are reasons for this. And I don't want to seem like I'm contradicting myself, because you're probably going to be thinking I probably will contradict myself in this. And I probably will. But for me, Avengers Endgame is held back through a few little things that stop it being one of the best films in the MCU. I'd say it's like number 5, maybe. It might be like my 5th or 6th best MCU film. Even though it's my favourite MCU film, probably, maybe my favourite. Yeah, I'd say it's probably my favourite MCU film. Is it the best MCU film? No. The story for me is a little bit overplayed, I think. The story is overplayed because you get the introduction scene of Tony Stark in space, right? You get all that. You get him coming back to Earth and then going to kill Thanos. And it just feels like the second act of this film just drags a little bit. It kind of drags a little bit too long. And it's for me, it's some of the scenes where they go back and do the time travel things. Now, I like them conceptually. They're fun, and I love the callbacks to the previous films. It just kind of feels like the film grinds to a halt a little bit there. It's the pacing more than anything in Avengers Endgame that stops it from being what it could be. The pacing in this film isn't great. It starts like this, goes like that, and then goes like this again, and then goes like that for a long time, dips again, and then goes up again for the end, right? And it's this weird kind of flow of pacing. It's not this. It doesn't do that. It goes like this, and then that again. It's this weird like structural flow in the story and the editing that stops it being as enjoyable as it should be. This film, like I said, it's the most fun I've ever had in a cinema, except from the last Harry Potter film. And it's because of the relationship that you build with these characters over time. But as a film on its own, it isn't without problems. And I think it's important to still note that even though you love a film, you can still criticize it. And I think Endgame isn't without criticism. I think the whole thing with Thor, it's funny for the first 5 minutes. For that first scene where they go to the new Asgard in Norway and they find him and they see that, he's fat, Thor's having a meltdown. That would have been really good if then after that you get more context for Thor being broken, and because that's what he is. That's why Thor's in the state he is. He's broken mentally. He's basically depressed, right? But we still get the fat jokes. Look at Thor, he's fat. Look at him, Lebowski. What are you eating? Cheese whiz? It's like it doesn't stop. It continues on and on and on and on, and it's unbearable. It drags and drags and drags, and things like that halt the film for me. It halts the film. It stops it in its tracks, and it gets a little bit tiresome. I feel like a lot of those scenes could have been cut out of the film, and it would have made the film flow a lot better and be better paced. But I'm not going to lie. I'm sorry. When it gets into that third act, it's so much fun. It's so much fun. For me, I've never cried. I don't cry at films a lot. Every single time that portal scene happens in the third act, right, the battle at the Avengers compound, right, when it's been destroyed by Thanos and they're all fighting, and at the end, right, when Cap's on his own, he, face to face with basically his death in a way, he straps up the shield, his broken shield, and he's prepared to go head on against all of Thanos' army. and then you hear the on your left thing, and Falcon comes through the portals, and all the heroes come back, and the music from Alan Silvestri, that score hits the crescendo, and the brilliant cinematography, the brilliant editing. Oh, every time. Me talking about it now, you won't be able to see it because the camera's not great, but I literally have goosebumps talking about it. That scene, it gets me. It gets like, I feel like a frog in my throat every single time. And I've watched the film probably about 4 or 5 times now, and every single time I watch it, I still get that feeling. It's a brilliant scene, and that's what this whole series has been building up towards. So it pays it off really well. That scene in itself is incredible. I love that scene. And that's probably one of my favourite scenes ever in film history, and that's why I say this is one of my favourite ever experiences in a cinema, was for that scene, maybe just on that scene on its own. That was what all of this has been building up towards, and it paid it off so well. It paid it off perfectly. I love that scene. And going from a positive back to a negative, I don't like what they do with Thanos in this film. And I love the character of Thanos in Infinity War. It's definitely the best villain in the MCU, one of the best character story arcs and best character development in any MCU film. However, the Thanos we get in this film is not the Thanos we get in Infinity War. All that story arc, all of this character building is gone for this version of Thanos, because that version of Thanos from Infinity War is killed in the first 5 minutes. So the Thanos we meet at the end of Endgame, he doesn't know the characters he's up against. He doesn't know these characters. He doesn't know the people. They don't have the relationship there. They don't have the history there, because Thanos hasn't got a clue who they are. So you don't care as much. There's not that tension there. There's not that revenge. It doesn't feel as strong as it would have been if this is the same Thanos that did all of this, like in Infinity War. It's not the same. And I think that's a problem, because the villain then isn't as compelling. He goes back to the mustache twirling Thanos of, I'm going to destroy everyone for the sake of it, right? And that's not as interesting for me. So for me, even though I love Endgame, all of the performances are incredible again. The visual effects are brilliant again. It's just the pacing and what they do with certain parts of the story, mainly what they do with Thanos. That, for me, is the problem with Endgame. But it's still the most fun I've ever had in a cinema. So I can't complain much, can I, really? Like, you know, is it a contradiction for me to say this is the most fun I've ever had in the cinema, but also say this is the problem? I had this problem. I had this problem. Like, is that a contradiction? I don't know. It doesn't feel like it's a contradiction, but maybe I'm wrong in saying I don't know. But it does kind of feel like it's a bit of a contradiction. I don't know if it is. But you guys let me know if you think I'm contradicting myself. But for me, I definitely think that there is some problems with Endgame. It could have been a bit of a sharper story. Like I said, what they do with Thor, a bit underwhelming and a bit overplayed. Pacing's off really badly, especially in that second act. And the villain is very bad. The villain isn't very well developed at all. This version of Thanos isn't a great villain at all. But it's still so fun, and it's still so enjoyable, and it's an incredible end to this Infinity Saga, right? It's such a great end. So yeah, I'd say it's probably like number 5. If I was ranking it, I'd put it in my like top 5 of the MCU. I'd probably say Winter Soldier. I'd say Winter Soldier. I'd say Infinity War, Homecoming. Oh, first Iron Man and then Endgame, I think. As far as a film goes, enjoyment-wise, Endgame is at the top. Endgame and Infinity War are at the top, 100%. And then it'd be like Homecoming and then Winter Soldier, then Iron Man, I think, as far as enjoyment goes. But as a film, I'm judging these as films. It's just a little bit below the other films at the top, right? But it's still really good. It's still really fun. I love it. You love it. Everyone loves Endgame. And I'll definitely be watching it again soon because I absolutely love it. Right, talking about the last film in Marvel's Phase 3, and that is Spider-Man Far From Home. This is technically the end of Phase 3, even though Endgame, in a way, is. Like, that's the end of the Infinity Saga, but it kind of gets a little bit more additional story treatment when it comes to Far From Home because we get more context post Infinity Saga. So we get more understanding of what's going on in the world. You know, we get a bit more of a closing feeling. It's in a similar way to what Ant-Man and the Wasp was. It's a palate cleanser, but it's a far better palate cleanser than Ant-Man and the Wasp was. This film is brilliant. Not as good as the first one. I'll say that straight out the gate. This film is not as good as the first one. It's still really good. Far From Home is still really good. Again, brilliant villain. Mysterio is incredible. What they do with that character. Jake Gyllenhaal's perfect in the film. Brilliant performance from Jake Gyllenhaal. The character of Mysterio is really brought to life very well. It must have been hard to bring a character like that to like a big screen, to a film, like to a live action film. But they did it really well. They did it really, really well. I like the character of Peter Parker in this because he feels a bit more mature. I feel like if we still would have got the childish Peter Parker, who's a bit of a bumbling child, you need to develop the character. You need to move the character on and progress the character and treat the character as he grows over the films. And with his experiences from the past two Avengers films and his own film, this is a very good natural progression for this character. You still get the innocence that Tom Holland brings, but you see this kind of sense of responsibility that he has and taking on the mantle of Tony Stark. At the start, he didn't want to. He was very shy on doing that. He kind of didn't care really on doing that. But then as the story progresses and he's tested, he learns that he can be that figure of hope that Tony Stark was in a way. So I like that character arc for Peter Parker in this film. Tom Holland, again, plays it brilliantly. All the performances in this film are really good. I love the scenes between him and Zendaya, MJ. I love those scenes. They're so adorable together. That's the best relationship in the MCU. You know, previously to this, I would have said it would have been Tony and Pepper, but MJ and Peter are the best relationship in the MCU. It's so sweet. It's so adorable. It's so innocent. It's so relatable. It's just perfect. It's perfect representation of what these characters, how they would actually react to each other if they liked each other, but they don't really want to say they do. But it's kind of it's like an unsaid thing. It's really, really well done. I love that. Also, it's just fun to watch, man. I like Far From Home. It's not as deep as a lot of other MCU films. It's still fun though. It's still really, really fun. I love it. Like I think it's really fun. It's enjoyable from start to finish. All the performances are really good. Jacob Batalon's brilliant again. Marissa Tomei is really good again as Aunt May. Jon Favreau has more of an expanded role as Happy. It's good to see him back. It's always good to see Jon Favreau back as Happy to play his character. He's really good in the film as well. So yeah, I do like Far From Home, and the ending. I've never screamed in a cinema, but I was very close when I saw J.K. Simmons come back as J. Jonah Jameson. I was so close to just screaming when I saw him back. And the way this film ends really sets up a sequel perfectly. And obviously, what we know about Spider-Man: No Way Home, about like this kind of bringing in this idea of a multiverse. You know, bringing the idea of Alfred Molina coming back, Jamie Foxx coming back. Maybe we get Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield back. I think this film definitely sets that up really well. And I love the ending of the film. I like the visual style of the film. It feels like a cartoon come to life in a way, but in a serious kind of way as well, treated with respect, not done over the top. I love Far From Home. It's brilliant. Really, really enjoyable. So just recapping, as we've now finished all of the MCU films, we've literally finished everything now. We've finished all the MCU films. We've gone all the way from Iron Man all the way to Spider-Man Far From Home. So recapping, I love the MCU. It's my second favourite franchise of all time. It's probably the best quality of content in the history of entertainment as far as like a media franchise. There's nothing that hits the quality of what the MCU has done on a consistent basis. There's no bad film in the MCU. The worst we get is mediocre at best, but we don't get like a Phantom Menace, or we don't get like a Hobbit, the Battle of the Five Armies, or we don't get like a Hunger Games Mockingjay Part 2. Like we don't get like with all the big franchises, they're always kind of missteps. We don't get a Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald. We don't get a Batman versus Superman. We don't get those. We don't get a Suicide Squad. I can say loads of examples. There's no bad film in the MCU for me. They're all average and above average. That's the lowest we get, really, is average. Like, it's like none of the films I'd say are lower than like a 5 out of 10. For the Dark World, I'd say is a solid 5 out of 10. But nothing's worse than that. Like, I'd say that's middle of the road, average. That's what it is. There's nothing really bad with the MCU. So that, in context, that's incredible. So on a personal note, I love the MCU. It's been fun to review all these films. It's fun to go back and rewatch these films and relive these films and get a concept of these stories again, because it just plays out so well. It's an achievement in filmmaking. It's an achievement in producing. Kevin Feige deserves a major credit. He's definitely probably one of the best producers in the history of film for what he's done with the MCU. And I can't wait to see where this series goes in the future with the introduction of the Fox characters that have been brought over, introducing Deadpool, introducing the Fantastic Four, introducing the X-Men in future films. Like, that's going to be interesting to see. I can't wait to see if they maybe bring in the Netflix shows, bring in the other show, expand the continuity. It's going to be fun to see. I'm excited to see how they go on Disney Plus. I'm loving Falcon Winter Soldier right now. I loved WandaVision. So the MCU is incredible, and on the big screen, it's been a joy to watch from start to finish. Even though there's been a few mediocre films in between, I've loved watching them. Okay, so now we've talked about the main topics. Now we can get on to your questions, because there's been some questions sent in on the live chat, so I'll get to those now. And then after the questions are done, guys, that will be the end of the show. It's ran a little bit long today, but there's been a lot of films in the MCU Phase 3, so it's been a bit of a tough one to do. Okay, right. Belboo writes, hello, and hello, Belboo. I hope you're okay. They write, what's your favourite MCU film ever? My favourite MCU film ever, if you didn't already recap on what I've said on this podcast, my favourite MCU film ever is Endgame. My favourite MCU film ever is Endgame. But if I was saying what's my personal best film in the MCU, it's Winter Soldier. So we have favourite film, Endgame; best film, Winter Soldier, if that makes sense. I think it's different. It's good to differentiate the two. So best film, best quality, right? What's the best quality of film? What's the best directing, the best acting, the best cinematography, the best, editing, the best pacing, the best action? Winter Soldier for me. What's my favourite experience watching an MCU film? For me, Endgame. Nothing comes close. Definitely Endgame. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. We get the same person sending in another question saying, when do you think the first mutant, apart from Peter, Pietro, Ralph, will appear? Well, technically he wasn't a mutant, right? So we didn't actually get, it was teased, it was kind of rumoured that he was going to be the Fox version of the character that obviously Evan Peters played, Quicksilver, Peter Maximoff in the X-Men films, right? In the Fox X-Men films. And then we have the same actor coming to play a very similar character, seemingly the same character to what he played in that series in the MCU in WandaVision. But he technically wasn't a mutant. So, but basically to answer the question, when do you think the first mutant will appear in the MCU? It's going to be tough, right? Because it's hard to answer a question like that, because how do we know where this is going to go, right? How do we know how this is going to progress over time? It's difficult to answer it, because it seems like we're getting a lot of multiverse stuff happening. It seems like they're going to embrace the multiverse. Obviously, I think they did the whole Pietro, like double one-sided, misguided thing, right, in WandaVision, almost to test the waters to see if this would fly, to see if people would like this. But I'd say maybe we'd get one in. I'm going to say Fantastic Four. I think the Fantastic Four film that's been announced. We know there's a Fantastic Four film coming. It's in development. It's been directed by the director of the Spider-Man films, John Watts. I think that would be a smart way to introduce that, unless they do something in the Spider-Man films, right? Or they do something on a Disney Plus show. Unless they do that, then I don't know. But I kind of feel around the time of a Fantastic Four. I think mutants are a long way away, to be honest. I mean, Kevin Feige said about 5 years for mutants, right? And that was what, 2019, was it? So we're 2021 now. So it's a bit of time away. It's a bit of time away until we get mutants. But I think they're definitely going to be here soon. I think the X-Men's just too much of a big property to not capitalise on. And I think whether it be an introduction of the X-Men altogether or an introduction of just a one-off mutant, I think it will happen sooner rather than later. But I don't think it will happen within the next few MCU films. I don't think we're going to get a reference to mutants in like Shang-Chi or Black Widow or Doctor Strange or Spider-Man. I don't think we'll get them yet, but I think it's on the horizon, definitely. Okay, the same person sends in another question. They say they need to explain how Sharon Carter exists in Peggy Carter. If Peggy Carter's only sibling Michael died in the war and left no family behind, she literally can't exist. Either have a flashback or bring back Peggy. Yeah, see, I'm guessing you're referencing more the Agent Carter TV series. I haven't watched the Agent Carter TV series, so I can't really ask that question. I can't really answer that question because I'm guessing that gets referenced. The whole Michael thing, her brother dying, gets referenced in Agent Carter because there's been no reference to that, I don't think, in the films. I mean, correct me on that. I could be wrong in saying that. Maybe there's like a one-off piece of dialogue there, maybe, but I can't remember off the top of my head anything mentioning Peggy's brother. So I don't know. But if that's a genuine plot hole, then yeah, I think they do need to reference that, whether it be a flashback or, I mean, we do get Sharon Carter. She's in Falcon Winter Soldier. So maybe we could get a bit of a flashback, a reference towards how she's came to be, if that's the truth with her brother dying, like if that's her only relative. Or she might have had other relatives out there. Like, we don't know. That it's a big world, right? We might have relatives out there that we don't really know or we don't know exist, right? Distant relatives, distant family, we don't know. So it's hard to say. We'll have to probably wait and see how that goes. But Sharon Carter is in Falcon Winter Soldier. So you never know, that could get referenced in your answer. Your question could be answered there. Okay, last question sent in by Belboo saying, if you have seen the TV show, both Netflix and ABC, which is your favourite? My favourite TV show from the MCU expanded continuity is Daredevil. Daredevil on Netflix, for me, is just a piece. It's a masterpiece. The first series, for me, of Daredevil is incredible. The first series of Daredevil is absolutely incredible. I haven't watched many of the expanded kind of, like I said, I haven't watched Agent Carter. I've watched a little bit of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but I didn't like it. I didn't like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and it's kind of been retconned now to being almost like a part of like the multiverse, like its own separate kind of continuity there. So really, it doesn't really fit into the MCU anymore. Then there's like Inhumans, which I haven't watched, but I heard is terrible. There's The Runaways. There's Cloak and Dagger. There's loads of different expanded like Marvel properties. But yeah, they've even said 100% Daredevil was amazing. I agree. Daredevil is incredible. That first season of Daredevil is brilliant. It's this incredible. If you've not watched, those people who are watching this, if you've not watched the first series of Daredevil, you're missing out. For me, it's one of the greatest individual series of TV ever. I love that first series of Daredevil. It's this really intense crime thriller. It's this intense action, suspenseful political drama. It's incredible. It's got good humor. It's dark in the right places. It's got this grungy visual style. The character of Matt Murdock's perfectly developed. I just love the character of Wilson Fisk. I would have never imagined Wilson Fisk to be developed that well on a film. I just think the character in itself looks a bit cheesy, right? He's this 8-foot giant, big, massive, fat ball bloke, right? But they developed that character and made that character more than what he is on the page, right? They added this whole thing about his wife and how he treats women, how he treats people, his aggressive tendencies, his physical presence. It's incredible. I love that. I love that first series of Daredevil. Like I said, if you've not watched it, definitely go and watch that first series of Daredevil. It's a piece, an absolute genius, a masterpiece. And fingers crossed we can get Charlie Cox in the MCU, because I mean it's been rumored that he's going to show up in the new Spider-Man film. Whether that happens or not, I don't know, but it would be great if that happens, because I love Charlie Cox as Daredevil. He's perfect in the role, and I'd like to see that continuity be brought back into the MCU and have this, have that character play more of a significant role on the big screen than obviously now his series have ended on Netflix. I'll answer your last question, Belbu, and that will definitely have to be the end of the show because this has run over 2 hours. So it's run out very, very long. And they said, would recommend watching Agent Carter. It's amazing. If you love Captain America, don't bother watching Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Absolutely terrible. Yeah, I agree. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is awful, but I'll definitely check out Agent Carter. I think it's on Disney Plus, Agent Carter. I'm sure it is. I think it is on Disney Plus, and I have Disney Plus now, so I'll probably will actually get around to watching Agent Carter, and I might do a little series review on here at some point on one of my podcasts. So I'll definitely get around to watching Agent Carter at some point. It seems like a show that I will like. I like the setting, that kind of 1950s, 1960s setting. I do like that setting. I love the actress, Hayley Atwell. I love Hayley Atwell in the role. So I definitely will check it out at some point. I'll definitely watch it, and I'll talk about it on the podcast at some point. And definitely Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is garbage, especially that first series. I've heard it's pretty good now, but that first series of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is just terrible. It's so bad. It's just awful. Yeah, really not good. Right, okay, guys, that'll be it for the show today. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of YMB Movie Talk today. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure that you like the video and share the video around. It just gets the word out about my podcast. Share it to your friends if they're interested in film, and we'll get a little community going talking about films. Make sure you also go onto Facebook and follow my Facebook page, YMB Productions. There I'll be posting everything that I post on my YouTube channel. And on there, we can start talking about different topics involving film as well. We can have some back and forth, have a little discussion on different things as well. That'll be very fun. Also, guys, if you prefer to watch an audio version of this podcast, you can find it on SoundCloud and on Spotify. The links will be down in the description below. Click on those links and follow my different pages, because that would be fantastic. Again, it helps the YMB community grow, talking about films. And also, obviously, it helps that will be an audio version as well. Say if you're out and about, you haven't got a lot of data or something, you can just go on Spotify, download my podcast, and then you can listen to it offline as well if you're out and about. So that'll be good for you as well, guys. It'd be good for me, help building, and it'd be helpful for you to listen to the podcast on audio version if you prefer to do that. So yeah, guys, also on SoundCloud, if you want to donate to the podcast, it just helps me get better equipment, helps me, expand the podcast and grow and help promote myself a little bit more. There is a PayPal me link in my SoundCloud profile. You don't have to donate. You don't have to. I'm not saying it's something you have to do, but if you would, that'd be very generous. Even if you donate like 50p, you don't have to donate anything, but anything will be appreciated. I'll put it all back into the podcast, getting better equipment, getting better cameras, getting better lighting, all of that, so I can produce the best product for you guys, so we can all talk about films and have a bit of entertainment there as well. So Okay, yeah, guys, I think that covers everything that we wanted to talk about today. Yeah, I think that covers everything. Like I said, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for supporting my show as always. Make sure you subscribe and hit the notifications bell on YouTube so you never miss another video. And I'll see you guys very, very soon. I should be doing another podcast tomorrow, but if not, I'll definitely be back on Wednesday to talk about some topics, because I know there's been some topics released today, loads of different bits of news talking about films. I'll discuss all that on Wednesday if I'm not doing a podcast tomorrow, but I probably will do one tomorrow. Make sure you keep updated on Facebook to know that. But yeah, guys, that'll be it for today. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you all soon. Love you all. And everyone, take care, look after yourselves, and I'll see you very, very soon.